hospitalized, and we have 0 deaths. I do want to remind folks that yesterday we reported 101 cases, so that is a significant jump, and as predicted, we are exponentially increasing with positive cases in Hamilton County. On that note, I want to thank you for your continued cooperation and efforts in protecting our community. By staying home and following state and local public health guidance on physical distancing, you are slowing the spread of COVID-19 and protecting our health care workforce and each other. Right now, the most important thing for Greater Cincinnati residents to do is to double down on prevention measures. Please follow the stay-at-home order. Only leave the house for essential needs and try to combine trips. Wash your hands, wash your hands, wash your hands. Cover your coughs and sneezes with your elbow or your upper arm. And if you feel sick, call your doctor. If you have symptoms and suspect that you have been exposed, do not go to the emergency room. Contact your primary care doctor, and if you don't have a primary care doctor, call an urgent care. If you qualify for testing, your doctor will provide further instruction. Please do not show up in person at the hospital emergency rooms. In closing, before you go out to do anything, ask yourself, is it worth it? On another key subject today, it's April 1st, and it's officially Census Day. Now more than ever, we need Greater Cincinnati's support in its push to make sure every resident of the region is counted in the 2020 census. Even a small undercount will cost the region tens of millions of dollars over the next 10 years, which is the length of the census. For every person that's undercounted, we lose over $1,800. Residents can fill out the census at 2020census.gov. 2020census.gov. After filling out the census, share on social media that you did it, along with the hashtag #GreaterCincyCounts to show your support for Greater Cincinnati. I did it yesterday. It took about 6 minutes, and I have posted Greater Cincinnati Counts. I want to say the hashtag should be fill it out now. Fill it out now. If you fill it out online or send it back via mail, then we won't need as many canvassers on the doors getting information. So fill it out now. Hashtag fill it out now. Our population count determines the amount of federal resources we receive for important safety net services, and these are also local economic development dollars. We're seeing that formula play out right now with the stimulus package surrounding COVID-19. As we recover from the financial impacts of this pandemic, we need every person counted so that we can get our fair share of dollars from the federal government to serve this community and all of its residents. To summarize, residents can fill out the 2020 census at 2020census.gov, or there's a phone number, by calling 1-844-330-2020. For more information, please visit GreaterCincyCounts.com. So, before we get to Jeff Aludo, who's going to talk about the county budget, I do want to say that it's April 1st, it's Census Day. It's also a day when many people in our community have to pay their mortgages, they have to pay their rents, they have to pay their bills. And, we know that people are struggling. They're not only struggling with some of the recommendations from public health related to staying at home and social distancing, they're struggling with their finances. Many people are not working right now. And so I do want to remind everyone there is some relief through unemployment. I know, and anecdotally we have heard, that it is very challenging to get through to that website. It's a state-run website, and we heard the health director and the governor say that they have increased the number of people taking those calls. I applaud them for that. We've had a lot of frustration here locally from folks that are trying to access unemployment and have not been able to do so. So I applaud the extra individuals that are going in to respond to those calls. And so I'm going to give you that contact information. We've given it to you before, but I think it's especially relevant today. The website is unemployment.ohio.gov. There is also a phone number for those of you that don't have access to a computer. The phone number is 1-877-644-6562. So today we have Jeff Aludo, our county administrator, here to discuss the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the county budget and how the administration is planning to adjust the budget in response. We have received a number of questions about this following the city's announcement on Monday, where they're laying off 1,700 employees. We are not at the point of announcing furloughs or layoffs yet, but we are working with departments, separately elected officials, and the courts to reduce their budgets. One thing that's important to note is that we have been cutting the county budget for years. Remember the budget struggles that the county has gone through. So there is not a lot of give in our budget, but we also have had some experience in doing some dramatic budget cutting. So one positive note, we've had experience doing this, but the challenge is that there's not a lot of extra in the county budget. We are also working with our federal delegation to understand what and how much federal aid will be coming to Hamilton County and how it can be utilized. So I'm going to call up Jeff Aludo to give an overview, kind of a 101 on the county budget so that people have an understanding of the dynamics, where the revenues are coming from, primarily sales tax, property tax, and fees, and what those expenditures look like, primarily safety-related expenditures, and what kind of strategies we have been, trying to do this for a couple of weeks now through HR, through the individual departments. And so Jeff is going to elaborate on what that process has looked like and where we are at this moment in time.
Thank you, Commissioner Dreihaus. And I absolutely am going to hit today on the budget and what we anticipate the impact to Hamilton County's budget will be through the COVID-19 crisis. I do want to take a moment, though, just to talk a bit about the employee aspect of this. So as county administrator, one of my primary jobs is to oversee the finances of the county, but also to oversee the actions and the responsibilities of the employee base. And I do just want to take a moment to thank all of the county employees for whether they're under the Board of County Commissioners or whether they're under separately elected offices, for everything they're doing right now to continue to work on the front lines, providing critical services to the public. I've been amazed at what we've seen employees do under very stressful and trying times right now as they respond to this crisis. We have employees and Job and Family Services who are dealing with 100% increases in food benefit assistance requests, who are responding to that every single day. We have building inspectors, as the governor's order indicated. Construction is still an essential service, and so the work of construction needs to continue going on in the community. We have building inspectors still doing the work of the community by turning those inspections around in under 24 hours. We have employees in the recorder's and auditor's office still ensuring that people have access to their land and title records. We have staff working in our courts every single day, and corrections officers in the Justice Center. So I just wanted to thank all the county employees and really local government employees everywhere for the work that they are doing to ensure that the seminal work of the public continues while we all go through this crisis. Every day I'm talking with our department heads about what our focal points should be. And we have continued to say that we have two focuses right now. Number one, keeping our employees and keeping our residents safe. And number two, continuing to provide our critical public services. And I think right now the employees of Hamilton County are coming through on both of those goals with flying colors. But these are incredibly trying times, and I just wanted to know, wanted all of our employees to know that we appreciate what they're doing and how they're responding to it. I was around. I started my work in county administration right before the Great Recession, and this, from an emergency perspective, is an entirely different animal. At least back in the Great Recession, we had the benefit of seeing that coming. We could see it coming in slow motion, and Hamilton County was one of the first local governments around to really be heavily impacted by it. Again, this is entirely different, and the magnitude and the length of what we are going to see is something that we are still looking at. We've all been watching as the governor and the state health commissioner have walked us on a daily basis through the curve as this relates to a health issue. Unfortunately, there's another curve coming, and that is the impact to local government, in this case, county government, as revenues, primarily those associated with our general fund, but not just general fund revenues, are impacted. And that is something that we have been in the process of assessing for several weeks now and are still in the process of assessing. As Commissioner Dreihaus mentioned yesterday, we are anticipating substantial revenue drops across most of our revenue sources this year. And while we don't have the benefits of a visual today, as Commissioner Dreihaus indicated, Budget 101, for those who may be watching at home who are not aware of the revenue sources that comprise county government, which would be different from the revenue sources that make up whether it's a city or a township operation. Our budget for 2020 was roughly $270 million. Just over $100 million of that was projected to come in through sales tax revenues. An additional $50 to $60 million through various service fees. So whether they're building fees, fines and fees through the court system, et cetera. Property taxes make up around $38 million of our revenue stream. And then we also get a significant chunk of revenue from intergovernmental sources. So a lot of state aid that comes to the county, both from the local government fund, which is the state and local government revenue sharing fund that exists in Ohio, or through things like reimbursement from the state to the public defender's office for costs in those offices. So we are anticipating a drop in the vast majority of those revenues. Right now, we're projecting a 20 to 30 million loss in sales tax. We are projecting a significant decline in casino revenues. One of the things the county gets is an allocation through a casino tax. When casinos went online in Ohio, we're anticipating a significant decline in those, a drop in our permit revenue as building and construction activity slows. We are anticipating a substantive drop in our court fees and fines. One of the issues is we don't quite yet know whether that is going to be an elimination of those fees and fines or whether we're going to just see those deferred, as eventually the activity and the work of the courts will resurface, and we would anticipate some of that revenue coming in. We can say with certainty, as I said earlier, that we will see a drop in some of our state aid as well. The local government fund, as the state continues to get hit with reduced income tax revenues, we are likely to see a reduction in our local government revenues, as well as things like public defender reimbursements. We're also going to see a decrease in in things like transfer fees for property. As property is transferred, the county gets a fee on those property transfers. We're likely to see those fall off as well. But while we've been stress testing this, and we've been our budget office has been working nonstop to stress test this and determine what we're going to see. At this point, we're looking at projections. We talked about the health curve. We have not yet started to see this from a financial perspective ripple through our organization. But we know, just as we did with the COVID-19 virus, we know it's coming, and so we have to anticipate it. The problem is again, just that we don't know exactly what the depth and the length of this crisis is going to be. We're very adept financially at projecting trends when we have a trend that we can see, and projecting those trends into our budget. But I can say that nobody has, and from a local government perspective, has any experience working in an environment where the economy is suddenly turned off like a spigot. It just doesn't happen. This is something that is completely new in our environment and that we have to react to. So while I think everyone is anticipating a recovery, again, the question is just how deep this is and how quickly the recovery happens. Again, our general fund is a $270 million operation. We have roughly 2,300 employees in our general fund alone. The vast majority of those employees are in our public safety and criminal justice function. As Commissioner Dreihaus mentioned, in the year 2008, that was roughly 3,000. So we have already shed in our general fund roughly 700 employees over the past 10 to 12 years, especially as we went through the years of the Great Recession, when we did things like closing a jail. We did furloughs, laid off a tremendous number of employees in county operations, and repositioned our operations substantially. So most of the employees we have now in our general fund are really on the front lines of providing core work to the community. So we have pulled back to bare bones years ago, and we're actually just on the precipice of getting the county right-sized and moving forward again, back on our feet when we were hit with what is now COVID-19. At the time, just weeks ago, was seen as an unimaginable type scenario. So as Commissioner Dreihaus mentioned yesterday, we realized we have to respond to this. We have asked departments for 20% across the board reductions from all of our general fund departments, not just those under the board. And as she mentioned, we also, fortunately or unfortunately, have experience working through this. We went through the Great Recession roughly a decade ago, and we did that by working cooperatively with all of our elected offices, all of our independent offices and agencies, to develop reduction strategies tailored to the mandated work of their offices. County government, again, is a 101 type thing. County government is different than a lot of other forms of government. County government is a conglomerate of mandated functions mandated by the state of Ohio that are under the auspices of separately elected officials to guide the work, whether you're talking about in the courts, the sheriff, the county prosecutor, recorder, auditor. All of these offices are separately, independently elected offices and have their own statutory and mandated functions. So we're working with all of these departments and elected offices to come up with a coordinated strategy. Myself and my staff are talking with each of representatives from these offices every single day to coordinate a strategy. This is the way we worked it through the years of the Great Recession, and we were able to navigate those waters. So we learned back then, but that by working together, we pull through these things much more effectively. Broadly speaking, we've implemented, as I believe as Commissioner Dreihaus said yesterday, we implemented an immediate hiring freeze. We've ended any new programming. I've got our budget staff looking through our budget for any new programming or spending that was allocated and identified for 2020 that we would put a moratorium on. We're looking at all of our contracts for ways to pull back on all of our contracts. Unfortunately, though, as we do this, we know that in many of our county departments, the only expenditure in these departments is staff. That's all. There's very little non-personnel resources in some of our departments. The only way they have to reduce budgets is through staff. So while we absolutely are going to do everything we possibly can to mitigate the impact on our employees, it's going to be difficult to navigate the crisis without some level of personnel impact. At the end of the day, it really just is a math equation. So as Commissioner Dreihaus said again, while we're not ready to announce today any coordinated approach on that, we are working on that strategy. We are working collectively with all of our elected and independent offices, and we'll announce that as soon as that plan is coordinated and it's ready to be announced. So That concludes my prepared comments, and I'm happy to turn it, Commissioner, back over to you for any questions or comments.
Jeff's back away, Jeff. It's social distancing here. So thank you. Thank you for the overview. I think it's helpful to get an understanding of the revenue side, the expenditure side, and also, as Jeff said, how county government operates in a way where we have mandated services that we must provide through these different departments, some of which are under the board and some of which are under separately elected officials. And so it is incumbent upon the county to coordinate both internally and externally to try to find a common strategy, if we can, from those that are recommending how they would respond via their own budgets. So that's the work that's going on right now. The other piece, and Jeff alluded to it, is that we are dealing with projections right now when it comes to the impact of a reduced sales tax. We don't know exactly what those reduced dollars are going to be, and so we are relying on some modeling that our budget department is doing to inform how we respond on the expense side. So that's kind of the tug and pull here that I think you see us struggling with. I have talked to folks throughout the state, other county commissioners, to get a better understanding of how they're dealing with this, and it's all over the map. And so we will be informed by our colleagues across the state, but also make sure that we've got a Hamilton County tailored approach to how we're going to address this reduction in revenue. So, Bridget, with that, I think we're ready for questions.
Thanks, Commissioner. First up is Jay Hanselman from WVXU. He has a question, 4 questions for Administrator Aludo. He says 2 will be very short. Answer.
Sure.
Hold on.
You've never experienced anything like this before?
We kind of caught up to mid-sentence.
Okay, I was asking about the modeling, and you had talked about the fact that, there's really not a lot of data when the economy is turned off like faucet. So how accurate can those models be? Do you just take a range and hope for the best?
That's a great question, Jay. It's and something we're wrestling with every day. We're trying to get some feedback from the state. Our sales tax is delayed on about on a 2.5, 3 month basis. So the state sees the impacts quicker than we do. So we're trying to get some and we're working with all the counties in the state to try to get some advanced word from the state as to what they're seeing. I can tell you our projections are changing. When this started out, just as we've seen with the incremental response from the state, from a social distancing perspective, then from an all-out stay-at-home order, our projections have changed as well. So we started off looking at rather incremental adjustments to revenue streams, primarily focusing on things like transient occupancy tax, parking revenues, those types of things, and some moderate reductions on sales tax, to now looking much deeper at all of these things, in particular sales tax, where we're right now projecting a couple of months where we project being down by as much as 70% and gradually ramping that back up towards the end of the year. So we're trying to be conservative on all this to the degree we can. I think conservative budgeting has helped us in the past. This is not necessarily your question, Jay, but we have a reserve balance of roughly $36 million that we have. That balance was created by ensuring that we were budgeting conservatively over the years. So we're going to continue to try to do that as we work through this problem.
Okay, another question.
Sales tax revenue. When will you have numbers for the transit occupancy tax and parking revenues for March?
So parking revenues will come in a little bit quicker. Transient occupancy tax, we typically get reports on that on a quarterly basis. We should know. We probably won't see something for a couple of months on this in terms of really knowing from an occupancy tax perspective where we are. But we are modeling that on a very conservative basis as well, knowing that right now our hotel sector is at extremely low occupancy. So again, that's another fund though where through some conservative budgeting by the board over the past, we had built up a balance there. We're stress testing that model, and that stress testing to date shows that we should be, again, assuming that we have a recovery here at the end of this year, or a gradual recovery through the end of the year and into next year, that we should be able to weather the storm in that fund. But we should, on occupancy tax, we'll know something over the next couple of months, Jay.
With a follow-up on the occupancy tax question, you were using residual funds from that to finance the purchase and demolition of the former Millennium Hotel. What does it mean for that financing if those residual funds dry up?
So that gets back to the question about us stress testing the model. So even prior to us moving forward with that project, we had stress tested the model to a degree even greater than what we saw in the Great Recession. So we, as we looked at conservative scenarios for the occupancy tax before we did that financing, or before we used those dollars to back what ultimately was the port's financing, we'd stress tested those models very conservatively. This is obviously something that no one would have predicted. However, even as we get into this and as we project out several months of what are likely going to be very sharp reductions in occupancy tax, again, assuming a steady recovery over the next 24 months, we are still projecting that fund should hold, given the residual balance that was there. So no immediate concerns for the financing costs on that particular project, but we'll just have to continue to monitor it as we see the quickness with which the recovery happens.
And last one, and I promise this is quick. The Cincinnati estimates the response to this crisis is costing the city an extra $13 million a month. Do you have a similar number for what it's costing the county per month?
We do not at this point, Jay. I can get you a total on that. We have very quickly in this recognizing that with a state and a federal declaration of emergency, we were going to need to track our expenses on this very diligently. So we implemented a system through our finance system to allow us to track every dollar in COVID-19 response. So that's just a matter of pulling that out of the financial system, and I'd be happy to send that to you after this media conference.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Scott Portman from the Inquirer, who has 3 questions for you, Administrator.
Jeff, question on, I know we talked earlier this week on the stadium fund. Do you have any idea, any better idea of how much in reserves or balance the county can last on pay off the debt on the riverfront stadiums as the sales tax revenues tank? And beyond that, what funds, what are the legal obligations? Where would the county get money to pay off the debt once that runs out?
Yeah. So the second question, Scott, we'll still look at that. We went through those same questions back when the sales tax fund was at bare bones back in the years of the recession. So we're still looking at that. But as it relates to your first question about the reserve balance, we have roughly $40 million in reserve in our sales tax fund. So again, we feel fairly confident right now that with that reserve, we should be able to weather a downturn in sales tax. Again, presuming that there is a steady recovery on this that is not delayed too far down the road. And I just want to again say that a lot of that is due to the prudent management of this board and boards in the past. I would say that every year as we close in on September and October, when that balance in that sales tax fund and the board starts going through a discussion about the sales tax fund and the property tax rebate, and going back about 7-8 years or so ago, we had to start pulling back on that property tax rebate, unfortunately. And the administration and the budget office had recommended pulling back on that, we would routinely get questions about, well, gosh, you have a 30, 40, $50 million balance. Why don't you just empty that balance out and put it towards a full PTR and then figure it out as we go? And I think what we had said at the time was that balance is there for some things that we can foresee, but a lot of things that we can't foresee. And there's no truer definition of something that we could not have foreseen than what we're seeing right now. So, the balance right now, Scott, is around 40 million. We're hoping that is able to allow us to weather the storm in the sales tax fund, and we'll continue to reassess as the months go on. We do get sales tax in every single month, so we'll be able to start to trend this fairly quickly once we start to see it ripple through the system.
You just quick follow-up question on that. How long would $40 million last? Like how long in debt payments would that cover?
Well, that's difficult to answer, Scott, just simply because we don't know exactly. We're not anticipating sales tax turning off to zero. It's tough to know exactly. I think our debt service on an annual basis is somewhere between $40 and $50 million in our sales tax fund. So we have essentially 100% coverage on 1 year there, but we're not anticipating that we're going to see a complete zeroing out of sales tax. To really get to the heart of your question, as we start to see how much what we can anticipate in terms of sales tax on a monthly basis, then we'll start working on a strategy for if that reserve balance is going to be needed to cover expenses out of the sales tax fund. What is going to be the draw on that reserve balance if necessary in order to cover that? And that's work that we've actually just started now, and will continue over the course of the next month or two, especially as we start to see the sales tax numbers roll in.
Just a quick follow-up question before I get to my final question. Legally though, if the sales tax isn't bringing in enough, would the county have to find money then from its general fund or somewhere else? I mean, what would the legal obligation be on that?
We're still looking at that right now, Scott, to pin that down. I'll get you an answer on it when I've got it.
All right, and then the final question, just to clarify, because you mentioned the sales tax revenue being delayed by like 2.5, 3 months. So do you see the county in June or July having to make decisions that the city of Cincinnati had to make yesterday? Is that going to be the roughest time financially for the county, June, July?
I think that's when we will have a much better understanding of what the impact is, Scott. But I would say that any decision on budget response strategies is going to happen much sooner than that. We know the impact is coming. It literally is just a question of when and how much. So I think you'll see a response much sooner than June or July, because you can look outside and see what's happening and what the impact is on the economy. And we should know a little bit more from the state quicker than that. So we're going to respond quicker than that. Is it going to be tailored exactly? Is it going to look exactly like the city's response? No, probably not. We are two completely different types of governments. We're two completely different types of organizations. So our responses will be different, but they will be significant. It will be a significant response given the work that the county has to do.
Jeff?
We have Chris Wederick from the Cincinnati Business Courier. Are you there?
Can you hear me? Sorry about that. Hello?
Chris, we can come back.
Jeff, can you hear me?
Now we.
Okay. Sorry about that. Jeff, can you assess the likelihood of bond default on any of the county's obligations? I'm mainly thinking of the stadiums and the parking garage obligations. How quickly does the county need to recover to see a recovery to avoid that? Then I have one other question after that.
Yeah, it's a good question. So on the parking, we had paid off actually, Chris, a lot of the debt on our parking. We still have some state loans outstanding, but a lot of our debt on parking operations had been paid off. So not so much of a risk there. You mentioned on the stadiums again, as I responded to Scott. We're going to know a little bit more about that as we get into assessing the level of sales tax reductions. But the fund balance that we have in the stadium sales tax should help buffer that. But we have not yet done a default analysis to determine, and really it'd be very difficult to do that until we know with certainty the level of sales tax coming in. So as we start to see that over the next couple of months, to the degree we have to start planning for something like that, we will look at it, but we don't have a specific calculation on that yet.
And then the other question is, how cooperative have the county office holders been so far? Obviously, they kind of control their own budgets. Are they willing to make staff reductions at this point? Can you give any details on that?
Sure. So I can't say with finality or specificity what is going to be in each of those in each of those plans from each department. But I can tell you that I have been talking on a daily basis with the whether the elected officials or the administrators from each of those offices, and I can tell you to a one, each and every one of them understands the criticality of this issue, the urgency of the issue. They understand that it is a scenario that we have not faced before, and understand that they have a role to play. So while I can't say exactly what the plans are going to look like, and I know it'll be different in every single department, the departments and agencies are made up of different types of functions. They are different from the perspective of their finances, even those that have restricted funds versus some that are more general fund related. But I can tell you that just from a conversation perspective, they all understand the issue, and they each and every one of them has indicated their support and their willingness to be a part of the solution on this. So I'll be able to talk more about that as we start to talk more specifically with them about what we're looking at as a strategy in each one of those offices.
Jeff, I had one other thing. I'm sorry. How does this affect the FC Cincinnati Stadium garage? Is that on pause at this point?
Question. So we're going through some pre-development work. Oh, sounds like we may have lost audio. Okay.
Now we're back.
Okay. All right. So I'll start over. So specifically, FC Cincinnati, and I would also relate this to our public infrastructure work at the banks. We are not halting that at this point. As we continue to model some of our sales tax revenues, as we continue to model our parking revenues, we'll continue to revisit this. Right now, we're in the pre-development stage of the FC garage north of the stadium. We have not halted that work at this point in time. We'll revisit it as we need to. But I think our hope is, as we start to model out some scenarios in our parking operations, which is where we're funding that particular project from, that again, assuming we start to see a tailing off of the public health crisis and we start to see a ramp up again of activity from an economic perspective, especially as we look into not even this year, but next year, and a resumption of the Major League Sports schedules, especially baseball, football, which drive a lot of the traffic down to the banks, we will have a better sense of the impact and what we might need to do with any one project driven out of parking revenues.
Next up, we have Todd Dykes of Channel 5.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me, Jeff? I have some questions for you. Hi, Jeff. Hello, can you hear me?
And Todd?
Okay, thank you so much. Just a few questions. Have there been any conversations with state leaders about the rainy day fund? I understand the last figure I've heard is around 2.7 billion. I know Governor DeWine is obviously saying it's raining. And I'm wondering if there have been conversations about tapping into that money, and if so, in what way would that work from the county's vantage point?
Yeah, so good question. And we have had some initial conversations with the state on additional state assistance. You may remember that a couple years ago we were dealing with what at the time seemed like a significant crisis, but everything pretty much pales into what we're seeing now. But it was related to our sales tax fund and the loss of, excuse me, Medicaid managed care sales tax revenues. And the state came to the table and put forth an assistance fund that helped buffer the loss of those dollars for a period of time to counties and other entities that were reliant upon sales tax. So very early on, as we started to project what was going to happen here, we started communicating with some of our leaders at the state about the institution of a similar type of fund for local governments, dispersed on whatever formula basis would be appropriate to get some relief from the state. Now, saying that, again, as this problem has evolved, we quickly recognize that the state is going to be experiencing a dramatic impact just as we are, and they're going to have problems of their own to deal with. So I think while we're hoping to continue that conversation with the state, we realize that everyone's going to be strained at this point. But we are going to continue to have that conversation, because anything we can get in terms of increase from the aid will be aid from the state will be very helpful, obviously.
It seems like let's see, the host has lost whatever. Can you hear me, Jeff?
Yes, now I can.
Okay, some glitch on my phone. I'm sorry about that. Regarding the human aspect and all this and the potential furloughs, and obviously a lot to be done on that front, should county workers, if there are furloughs, layoffs, however that's quantified, effectively with the unemployment benefits being extended at the federal level and being enhanced, is there some measure of, I don't know if the word's comfort or how you would characterize it, that a county worker who does end up being furloughed as part of the cut, that they would at least be able to have their salaries effectively paid at a level maybe higher than anticipated because of what's happening at the federal level? What's the message there to workers who are clearly on edge right now, wondering what's going to happen?
Yeah, it's a good question. Todd, I don't know that there is a concerted message yet at this point on that to that question. I would say that certainly to the degree that there are impacts, whether they be furloughs, layoffs, et cetera, we want to do them, and we would do them as we always have, in a way that attempts to mitigate that impact to employees as much as possible. So, the federal government and the CARES Act that they passed, and the stimulus dollars that are there, particularly on the unemployment front, should be tremendously helpful for anyone who finds themselves unemployed for even a period of time related to job loss due to COVID-19. So yes, that other than stating that we know that benefit is there, and that it would have the ability to buffer the impact to an employee who finds themselves in that situation, we certainly would be sending that message. But again, we're not yet to the point where we know exactly what that what the impact will be from a furlough or layoff perspective.
And just two more real quick, Jeff, if you don't mind. One, you mentioned a drop in court fees and fines and so forth. Is there a correlating cost savings to those kinds of things? When things go away, does the county save money on the other side?
Yeah. So in some cases, yes. So especially as we continue to see a drop in the levels of inmates at the Justice Center, there are some costs associated with that are going to be volume based, meal costs, things of that nature. Overtime costs in terms of staffing shifts should come way down. So some costs, yes. Uh, uh, but again, with cost being in the county so much personnel driven, it's going to be very office dependent, Todd, in terms of where those savings are.
And last thing I'll ask you, Jeff, while I've got you, it's the idea that, and I'm trying to put on my economist hat here, but if there's a delay in the sales tax revenue coming in, as you've outlined, and I'm learning this, I mean, some might ask, well, can you shift priorities and say, okay, we're going to focus really on keeping personnel on staff, and therefore stop other things that are happening, since we have this time frame to try to, in essence, pool that money to go to personnel costs. I mean, that might be totally naive, but I imagine somebody might hear that and wonder if that's a possibility. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Yeah, no, Todd, it's a great question. And yes, so we are at this point doing a lot of that in terms of looking at programs and other activities. Be it when we had our budget conversations last year, we talked about investments that we needed to make in this county. We need to make investments. We have roughly $200 to $300 million of deferred maintenance on all of our buildings and facilities throughout the county. We were prepared to make a substantive leap towards getting a lot of that deferred maintenance taken care of this year. Obviously, that is at this point off the table, so that we can focus on making sure that we get the core work of the county done, which to a large degree relates to personnel costs. We were preparing to invest in a community-wide economic development fund to assist some of especially our first-ring suburban communities with some of the difficulties that they have in terms of attracting jobs and investment. That program is deferred. So we're going to be deferring a lot of things that we're hoping to be able to get to on the other side of this, but just right now are not mission critical for the county, that we need to focus our efforts in other places.
Thank you.
The next question is for Commissioner Denise Dreihaus, and it comes from Anna Becker from Channel 9, WCPO.
Doing
Yes,
such a nice
hello.
job of it, by the way.
Hi, Commissioner Dreihaus. My question is for you. It's about numbers. I know at the beginning you gave the new numbers of COVID-19 cases, and I was just wondering if there were any numbers on recovery. Greg Kesterman gave those recovered numbers, people who had recovered from COVID-19 yesterday. Do we have any new numbers today?
I don't have them, but I will get them for you tomorrow. Yeah, I think that's the good news that sometimes I think we forget to report, is that we have all these cases that are new coming on, but some of the folks that are in those numbers or were in those numbers a couple of weeks ago have recovered. And so I will promise to you I will get that good news number for you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions? Seeing none, I think that concludes the questions from our reporter.
Okay, so I just, I'm going to get my notes. Hold on. All right, so first of all, I want to thank Administrator Aludo for being here. As you can see, the county administrator, the budget director, the department heads, the elected officials are all coming together to figure out a strategy as we move through this. As was noted, we do not have firm numbers related to sales tax income because those numbers are delayed. And so, we have a minute, but not much more than that, to try to figure out a strategy, because I think what we know is that we're going to need to do something to reduce expenses related to a reduction in revenue. And we don't want to wait 2 or 3 months to implement a strategy that we know we need to do to shore up the county budget and to shore up what we're trying to do for our employees. So I want to say that Jeff alluded to it a couple of times. We've done some pretty prudent budget strategies related to all funds. And you heard him talk about that by way of the stadium fund, by way of the hotel fund, by way of the parking fund, and by way of the general fund. We've got reasonable reserve in the general fund. We have not always had that because we've been in challenging times. And so we fortunately can partially rely on that to help us. It's similar to a rainy day fund, although I will say the state has a far higher amount in its rainy day fund than we have in our reserve, but we have built up a reasonable reserve. And I want to make sure that people understand that is a result of prudent budgeting by the county administrator and the budget director and the budget staff. And so I want to thank them for this work. That is why we are where we are today. And without that work, we would be, I think, in more trouble than we are, even though that's all a matter of degree. I also want to thank the county employees. You know, this is challenging. It's challenging for everybody throughout the community. County employees are no exception to that. You know, city employees are really struggling right now. So, you know, we're all in this together. And so we are going to do our best work to try to figure this out together. So with that, thank you again, Jeff, for all your hard work. You know, this the floor where we are on the 6th floor of what I call the Todd Portune Center for County Government is pretty empty right now, but it's really clear that the budget staff is doing their work every day to get us through this. So thank you to those employees and to all the employees throughout the county. So tomorrow we are going to talk about voting. We've had some questions, and I think there is some confusion because things have changed related to how people are going to vote in the primary this year. And so the Board of Elections is in charge of that. So Gwen McFarland, who is the chair of the board, and Alex Triantafilou, who is also a board member, are going to come in and talk to us in a bipartisan way about how people should vote this year and give us some of those important deadlines and those timeframes that people need to hit to make sure that their vote counts in the primary for 2020. So I'm looking forward to that conversation. We'll probably roll that video again that I think was pretty instructive about what people should do to get their ballots. But we're going to dig in a little bit tomorrow with both Gwen and Alex to get more information. So thank you again for participating, and we'll see you tomorrow. Thank you.